And this morning we have Mr. Gilbertson with us. He's now the chairman of commodity investment company Pallinghurst Resources, and he's here to tell us more about this deal. Brian, thank you so much for joining us on this Tuesday. Good morning to you. Let me just ask you about this deal. How are you building Jupiter and Pallinghurst, and how does this South African manganese project fit in?
Well, I think by way of background, I should probably say that Pallinghurst has been one of the long-term and early evangelists for the concept of the Steel Feed Corporation. The world is going to continue to grow. In order to grow, it's going to need steel. And in order to make the steel, you're going to have to need the raw materials. And those are essentially iron ore, manganese, and coking coal. So Pallinghurst wanted to position itself into that commercial space. We had two really interesting projects. One is the Tshipi manganese project in South Africa, and you should know that 80% of the world's manganese is located in the Kalahari Basin. So my great-great-great-grandchildren will be using cutlery made from steel that uses manganese from that area. The second project is iron ore in the Yilgarn here in Western Australia. Now, to get into iron ore is normally a very expensive business because you have to build the infrastructure. You have to build the port, you have to build the railway lines and so on. But in the Yilgarn, there's an existing port and an existing railway line. So we positioned ourselves into those two projects, the iron ore in Jupiter and the manganese in the Tshipi project. Okay. And this transaction, that we're proposing now is to bring those together.
Okay, well, Brian, let me just ask you this. Pallinghurst, the evangelist, as you called it, has actually posted a loss in the last year, actually. So how will this deal and how will this outlook for steel affect Pallinghurst's bottom line going forward?
You know, you really shouldn't be looking at that kind of figure because Pallinghurst is a company that's building up. It has, at the moment, only of its 4 projects, those are only coming into production now. So, in fact, the figures that you're probably quoting, I think, are just exchange rate fluctuations in currencies. They have nothing to do with operating businesses.
Okay, Brian, so what numbers should I be looking at for Pallinghurst then? What is the outlook going forward?
Well, I think you should look at the projects that I've just been describing. And Pallinghurst runs 4 projects. If you wish, I'll go through all of those projects. But the 2 that I've sketched so far are really projects with enormous potential. They will transform, in the case of the manganese project, an exploration property into a major producing asset. And the iron ore property in the Yilgarn has the potential, if it is fully developed, to reach a 20 million ton a year export capacity.
So with this purchase, let me just ask you, Brian, how do you plan to fund this purchase? Will you be raising any more cash at this point?
No, this is not about raising cash at this point. As I said, it's a corporate restructuring in which we are bringing the manganese asset and the iron ore asset together into Jupiter. And Jupiter is, in that process, transformed into a much more exciting company. It has 2 assets, and Tshipi, the manganese project, is much closer to production than the iron ore is. And it also brings onto its shareholder register a number of large and financially strong and long-term investing shareholders who have already indicated that they're willing to put in any money that is reasonably needed to firstly develop the manganese project, but also to develop other projects that meet the criteria.
Yeah, and since it's in the steel feeding pipeline, I guess it depends really on steel prices going forward. What exactly is the outlook here, Brian?
Well, I really don't want to get into a position where I have to try and forecast what the steel industry is going to do and the prices will do over the immediate future. You know, the mining industry is actually not like that. You make your decisions. It takes you 3 or 4 years before you have the mines built, and then you live with the consequences of that for decades ahead. The concept of the Steel Feed Corporation is that essentially the world will continue to grow. And if that happens, you cannot have economic growth without having steel. It just doesn't happen. Okay. And you can't make steel without the 3 commodities I've told you about.
Yeah, very true, Brian.
The world stops without them.
That I bet it does. But Brian, since I have you on the line here, let me just ask you about the situation with Rio Tinto and its executives, 4 executives being charged in China as your capacity as a former CEO of BHP Billiton. But what do you make of this situation, and what does it say to you about doing business in China as a resource provider?
Well, you know, I know nothing more about those developments than I've read in the press, probably the same way as you have, and you may even have interviewed those much more close, that are closer to the situation than I am. So that's the only background I have on it. I think what we have to recognize is that China has been a pillar of demand throughout the recent past when we were going through the global economic crisis. And I think we have to recognize also they're going to be a huge consumer for decades and decades ahead. So, I mean, all of that, I think, has to be seen against that background.
All right. Okay, Brian, thank you so much for your time today. Brian Gilbertson, chairman of commodity investment company Pallinghurst Resources, and also the former CEO of BHP Billiton.